The quiet suburban neighborhood looked peaceful. But one homeowner had just discovered something that would change everything. What he found hovering above his backyard would expose a secret the HOA never expected anyone to uncover. Daniel Carter had lived in Willow Ridge for nearly 6 years. His backyard was his private sanctuary. Tall cedar fences surrounded the property, a small vegetable garden grew near the corner, and a wooden deck faced the open sky where he spent evenings reading or drinking coffee. But lately, something strange had started happening. At first it was just a faint buzzing sound. Daniel heard it while watering his tomatoes one afternoon. A low mechanical hum floated above him for a few seconds, then disappeared. The next day it happened again. This time Daniel looked up quickly and caught a glimpse of a small black drone hovering just above the fence line. It paused for a moment, almost as if it was watching him, then quickly zipped away. He assumed it belonged to one of the neighborhood kids, but the drone kept coming back, morning, afternoon, even once during dinner. Each time it hovered longer, slowly drifting above his backyard like an uninvited observer. Daniel felt uneasy. His backyard was private property, yet something was clearly watching. A few neighbors mentioned similar buzzing sounds. Then one evening Daniel noticed something that made his stomach drop. The drone wasn't just flying randomly, its camera was pointed directly into his backyard. That's when Daniel realized something disturbing. Someone wasn't just flying a toy, someone was spying, and the truth behind the drone would soon lead to a moment that stunned the entire HOA community. Daniel decided to investigate before making any accusations. The last thing he wanted was unnecessary neighborhood drama. But deep down, he already suspected who might be responsible. The Willow Ridge HOA had a reputation. Its president, Linda Crawford, believed the neighborhood rules should be enforced at all times. She frequently inspected lawns, fences, and even outdoor decorations to make sure everything met community standards. Many homeowners felt she sometimes crossed the line. Still, no one had ever accused the HOA of spying before, until now. The following afternoon Daniel prepared himself. Instead of ignoring the buzzing sound, he waited patiently in the backyard with his phone ready. Right on schedule, the drone appeared again. It floated slowly above the fence line, hovering quietly like a curious bird. Daniel quickly zoomed in with his phone camera. The drone carried a small mounted camera and a sticker on its side. 3 small letters were printed clearly: WRHOA, Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. Daniel stared at the screen in disbelief. The HOA had been flying a drone over his backyard. For a moment he considered confronting Linda immediately. But something stopped him. If the HOA really was monitoring residents this way, confronting them too early might give them time to cover it up. So instead, Daniel did something smarter. He documented everything. Photos, videos, dates, times. For nearly a week he collected proof. Then something happened that turned a strange situation into a neighborhood-wide scandal. Because one afternoon, the drone flew somewhere it should never have gone, and someone far more powerful than the HOA noticed. Daniel's property backed up against a wide-open field that most residents barely noticed. The field looked empty from a distance, but it actually bordered a small military communications training zone located outside the neighborhood. A simple sign stood near the far fence: authorized area, no unmanned aircraft. Most residents ignored it. Apparently, the HOA did too. That afternoon the drone flew higher than usual. Instead of hovering just above Daniel's backyard, it drifted over the fence and into the open field. Daniel watched from his deck as the small black machine buzzed farther away. At first nothing happened, then suddenly 2 military vehicles appeared on the road near the field. Within minutes, uniformed personnel stepped out and began pointing toward the sky. Daniel's phone buzzed with a notification from a local community alert group: military activity near Willow Ridge. Possible drone violation. His heart started racing. Moments later the drone dropped from the sky, not dramatically. Just suddenly, it lost stability and slowly descended into the field beyond the fence. Daniel couldn't see exactly what happened, but the message was clear: the drone had entered restricted airspace, and the military had stopped it. Within 20 minutes the neighborhood began filling with flashing lights and curious residents stepping outside their homes. But what stunned everyone the most wasn't the drone falling. It was discovering who had been operating it, and when the military officers started asking questions, the HOA president suddenly looked very nervous. Word spread quickly through Willow Ridge. Neighbors gathered near the fence line, whispering and pointing toward the field where military vehicles now surrounded the fallen drone. Daniel stayed quiet, watching from a distance. Soon a group of officers approached the neighborhood entrance, speaking calmly with residents while asking a simple question: does anyone know who owns a drone registered to Willow Ridge HOA? Silence filled the street, then someone spoke. A neighbor slowly pointed toward Linda Crawford's house. Within minutes, the officers walked up her driveway and knocked on the door. Linda stepped outside looking confused, though her expression changed immediately when she saw the drone in the officer's hands. "This belongs to the HOA," one officer said calmly. Linda hesitated before answering, "Yes. It's used for community inspections." The officers exchanged brief looks. "Were you aware that this drone entered restricted training airspace today?" Linda's confident posture began to fade. It was only checking properties," she replied nervously, but the officers weren't focused on lawns or fences, they were focused on the camera attached underneath the drone. One officer turned the device toward the gathered residents. The memory card was still inside, which meant every flight, every recording, and every backyard the drone had hovered over was now documented, and once that footage was reviewed, the real problem for the HOA would become impossible to ignore. Later that evening, several homeowners were invited to the local community center where officials reviewed the drone footage. Daniel sat quietly in the back row while the recordings played on a large screen. The videos confirmed everything. The drone had repeatedly flown over private backyards, swimming pools, patios, family gatherings. None of it had been authorized. Linda tried to explain. The HOA was just making sure properties followed community guidelines, she insisted. But the explanation only made things worse. One officer calmly responded, "Homeowner guidelines do not override privacy laws." The room fell silent. Daniel felt a mix of relief and disbelief. What started as a strange buzzing sound had now turned into a serious investigation. Even some HOA board members looked shocked. They claimed they had no idea the drone was being used that way. Linda sat quietly, realizing the situation had completely slipped out of her control, and the biggest surprise was still coming. Because when officials finished reviewing the drone's flight data, they discovered something else. The drone hadn't only entered restricted airspace once, it had crossed into that military zone multiple times over several weeks. Which meant the situation wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. Now it was a federal violation. The following week, the Willow Ridge community meeting was more crowded than ever. Nearly every homeowner showed up. Daniel sat quietly while officials explained the results of the investigation. The drone flights had been logged automatically. Each flight path clearly showed it leaving the neighborhood and entering restricted airspace. Several times, Linda looked exhausted as she listened. What began as an attempt to monitor neighborhood standards had spiraled into something much bigger. Officials explained that unauthorized drone activity near military zones carried serious penalties, but instead of escalating the situation aggressively, they offered a solution. The HOA would immediately end all drone operations. They would also issue a formal apology to residents whose privacy had been violated. Most importantly, the HOA board would undergo new oversight rules to prevent similar actions in the future. Linda finally stood up. Her voice was quieter than anyone had ever heard it before. "I thought I was protecting our community," she admitted, "but I clearly crossed a line." The room remained silent for a moment, then several neighbors nodded, because the lesson had become clear. Power without limits could easily become a mistake, and for Willow Ridge, that mistake had nearly turned into a national headline. But Daniel knew something even more ironic about the entire situation. The HOA had tried to watch everyone else. Yet in the end, they were the ones being watched. The Willow Ridge neighborhood slowly returned to normal over the next few weeks. The buzzing sound above Daniel's backyard never returned. Residents rebuilt a sense of trust that had quietly faded during the drone controversy, and surprisingly, Linda Crawford changed the most. She stepped down from her position as HOA president shortly after the investigation ended. During her final meeting, she admitted something the entire neighborhood had suspected. She had allowed authority to cloud her judgment. The drone had seemed like an efficient way to enforce rules, but she never stopped to consider how it would feel for neighbors to be watched in their own backyards. Daniel didn't hold a grudge. One afternoon, he even saw Linda walking through the neighborhood gardens with a few residents, helping plant new flowers along the entrance road. This time there were no drones, no inspections, just neighbors working together again. Sometimes the biggest lessons come from unexpected moments: a buzzing drone, a simple backyard, and a mistake that nearly spiraled far beyond a quiet suburban street. But in the end, the truth came out, the community learned from it, and the situation that started with suspicion ended with accountability. And that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.